My name is Jan, and I'd like to give a workshop on how to make a dictionary and how you can learn a language by making a dictionary. Yeah, unfortunately there's no internet, as I just learned, so a lot of what I was going to do was actually to work on dictionary entries with you together in the online dictionary Wiktionary, but yeah, so we won't be able to do that. What I could do is maybe have more sort of like a discussion style workshop where we kind of talk about dictionaries, how you use them, and like what would like your ideal dictionary look like especially in the context of language learning, because that's I guess that's what everyone here wants to do. So the first thing I was going to ask anyway was like who actually knows about the Wiktionary Project here of the participants? Nobody? Okay. One half person, half maybe? Okay. Yeah, so maybe then I can just start a little bit just talking about it. So Wiktionary is a collaborative dictionary, which means that anyone pretty much can edit dictionary entries. And it's a sister project to Wikipedia, which I guess most of you know, and which is based around the same principles of like it's a wiki you can edit, but instead of editing content around like larger topics, it's just around like single words or single items like of a language. And so the big advantage of that is that you can actually you can make your own dictionary. You can choose whichever words you want. There's like feedback. Okay. I'm going to go a little bit away from there. Yeah, so anyone can edit. That's the idea. You just still okay. Yeah, like in Wikipedia, you just go to the page, you go to a definition of a word, you're not happy with one of the definitions, you just change it. Likewise, if there's a new word you would like to see in the dictionary, it's not in there, you can just create it. Like the only thing you have to take into account is that you have to actually, depending on the word, if it's like a well-used, well-known word already, like it's usually you can just put it in. But if you say if it's like a new word, like a newly coined word, then you should provide references. So? Okay. From here? Yeah? Yeah? Is it better? Yeah. Or maybe I can just, I don't know if it's, yeah. It's for the... Middle? Okay. Here? Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Yeah, so what was, yeah, so you can put in new words, you can edit words, and the great thing about it is like, in theory, it's like for all possible languages. So it's like a dictionary, because usually like you buy a dictionary, it's like either a monolingual dictionary for like one language you want to know about, or it might be a bilingual dictionary with two languages. But the great advantage of the Wiktionary project is it's really a dictionary which potentially can have like all languages in there. So you can have like the known languages, so like obviously like the popular languages, or like English, and English is kind of the main language, and then it's like, I guess second language is probably French, I don't know, Spanish, something around like, it's kind of around popularity, but there's nothing stopping you from adding like really like just a local language which is spoken somewhere in South America, like by one tribe, if you can actually if you have like reference for it. So if there's an existing dictionary, for example, with like a compatible license, like that's a big problem, or like that's one of the things I want to talk about as well. It's like you can't just put anything in it, so you can't just take an existing dictionary and obviously just copy things into Wiktionary. So it has to be like material which is on like an open license, or where you have the rights to actually use it in that context. Sometimes like you can actually ask people if they have dictionaries, like if you can use them, or like what a lot of people do is like they just use public domain dictionaries, like, so are very good, like, dictionaries from, I don't know, like 50 years now, I guess 80 years now, public domain, where you can take definitions, or which you can take as a starting point, and which has already been done in a lot of cases. So that's kind of the platform or the basis for this work. And so the motivation for my talk, or for my for this workshop, was actually that I started contributing to this project, and I was learning Portuguese, and I looked up words, and a lot of times actually I ended up on Wiktionary, and found definitions for the words I was learning, and I realized that they often had like a really good, like sometimes not really complete kind of entry, but often like usable, especially if you're learning the language, like, so if you're learning the language from scratch, or from like without any existing vocabulary, like all the words you need, there's like, it's very likely that they are already in Wiktionary, because at least for the main languages, because there's a good basic coverage. So it's not really like something you would use for like translation work or something like that, because in some, like depending on the language, but because it doesn't have a lot of depth. It's like, it's still a work in progress, like things are being added all the time. But for, let's say the basic, like 1,000, I don't know, like the initial words you learn, they're usually already in there. So I started to use it, and I started to like slowly contribute to it. And then I realized that by actually making changes to the dictionary, like adding senses and adding things to it over the time, just like kind of this whole process for me was like, I realized it's kind of almost like formalizing the language in a way, which is actually what a dictionary is. And I recently heard like a really good definition for what a dictionary is in a podcast, and I think it was like the Linktastic podcast, and she said that the dictionary is like the kind of an instruction manual for an open source project, and like the open source project in this case is language, and like it's kind of always changing, like you always like new words come, like grammar changes slightly, but it's like this documentation which can never catch up with like the reality, because like the paper dictionaries especially, like they have like these slow cycles, like a word has to be used for a long time before it actually makes it into the dictionary. So like sometimes words will like show up like for years after they first got used, and so this is like this constant problem of like updating this instruction manual in the traditional sense. And so like with the collaborative approach, like this becomes a lot easier, because everyone uses language, and as you use a language, like you know like what is kind of current, or like what is used and how it is used, and then you can just put it into the dictionary and into Wiktionary, and then like by doing this ensure that everything is kind of, in theory at least, always up to date. So that's like the big advantage. And now like I think the traditional like dictionary makers are more and more kind of changing their process a little bit as well, like, because in a similar way that like encyclopedias like have more or less not disappeared but become less relevant, and in the same way I think it will happen in the kind of dictionary business or world. Yeah, so I'd like to get really like an idea of I don't know what kind of dictionaries people use, maybe, or like if you use electronic dictionaries, or like what kind of things do you look for when you use one, like maybe, I don't know if we
So we don't have a microphone to circulate, so either you talk very loud or I can repeat the question. But I have one question.
Yeah, sure.
Can you, with this wiki tool, create your private dictionary? That means that you would put your mnemonics or whatever is important for you, but not probably for the others.
Yeah. You can have like, so if you make changes in Wiktionary, you can make it anonymously, so without creating an account. But if you can create an account, and if you create an account, like when you create an account, you get it's called like a user page, and you can make edits in your user page. So you can have you can create entries That's actually something I wanted to show. You can create entries and you can basically work on these. Sometimes people do that because, say, there's a new word and it's not really, it's kind of getting into the mainstream language, but it's not really there yet, so it's really hard to find citations for it. So you could create an entry in your own private space, and then later on, like when you find citations, or when you find, when you can prove that this word actually exists, and existence in the Wiktionary sense is like you have to find three or four independent written occurrences, and then you just move it into the main namespace, it's called, yeah. No, everything is visible always for everyone. So there's no concept of private spaces there. Yeah, which is yeah. Everything is public by default. That's kind of how the collaboration model works. One thing I want to show, which is really good, is which is really kind of a nice feature, is like you can create. Like some people started creating linked text, like hyperlinked texts of written in another language. Especially for learners, so you have like a text which is taken from, I don't know, like some public domain, usually sources, and you put the whole text onto Wiktionary, and every word, like every single word, you link back to the main form, which is usually like what's called like the lemma, like the main inflected form, and then people can just read that text, and then the words they don't understand, they just click on it, and then takes them directly to the main dictionary page, the main entry page, where they can read about like the definition and learn about the sense, and then they can go and find other words. Which is like, for me, that's also like the other really interesting thing about it, is like everything is linked. That's kind of the basic working, as compared to let's say a paper dictionary. You start on one entry, and usually there's a list of synonyms, which is usually like really, really useful when learning a language. It's just to get an idea of, like, if you don't want to read the definition in English itself, you can just look at the synonyms, and if you know the word already, you can kind of link it up. At least that's how I like to look at it, is kind of building this whole network of words in your head, and also in like this electronic form where everyone can see it. And so it's like synonyms, which is really useful for language learning. And a lot of entries do have synonyms, so it really depends. But you can always, like, if you can always add them. So if you look at an entry and it's like, I know this word, but well, I don't know this word, but I know like a similar word in this language, which kind of has a similar meaning. I just add a synonym, and so I create a link between the two words. Another thing I wanted to show as well, like, which is, I have to like kind of explain it a little bit, is this kind of connectedness of language and our languages, and that's something which becomes really obvious if you look at the word roots, sources, so like the etymology of words, and a lot of entries have really good etymology, going back to, like, sometimes going back a bit too far, like going to like Proto-Indo-European, which is probably not so useful in a learning context, but more like academic. But that's at least like that's really, really useful if you want to. You learn a language and you have already existing knowledge of other languages, and you want to sort of link up all these words, and the word kind of looks familiar, or sounds familiar, but you're not quite sure. Then you can always look at that, look at the etymology, and then see if there's a connection. There's yeah.
Sometimes when you are in English or in German or in Italian is not a very good dictionary.
Yeah.
But in English or German or in other language, you have sometimes explanations that you don't find in the French part of the dictionary. And it is very interesting when you are looking in other dictionary. It's for Polyglot a good exercise here. And you find sometimes tracks to look for another way or similarities between language. Etymology is It is, in fact, it is very rare that you have a sure etymology. But compare the different languages for Polyglot. It is a very good way to try the different languages.
Yeah, that was a good point. Like, as you just mentioned, there's not just like an English Wiktionary, there's also like a French Wiktionary, it's called. And there's, I don't know how many editions there are, like for all various languages, you have a dictionary, which kind of, they all have the same goal, but the definitions are in the language. So in the French, in the Wiktionary, you would find the same words as in the English Wiktionary, but with French definitions, with French etymology, and so on. So there's a lot of duplication in some sense, but it's also interesting because it's a different perspective on language. Like, so you have like, as you said, like the Wiktionary has like, already it has like a better coverage for French terms, obviously, because it's mostly French people working on it.
And the good part is down, you have the translation for the different definition of a word. And I like to look sometimes 40 translations in different languages, sometimes Greenlandic, Inuit, yeah. And you can compare this word with the same word in 40 languages. From this language you are going to the other dictionary, and it is a fascinating subject.
Yeah, because the translation is another point I haven't mentioned yet. So you get you get for every entry in the dictionary or in the Wiktionary, you get a translation into potentially any language, and you can, and that's
sometimes 200 words.
Yeah. There's some.
It's ever interesting to see which words are with a lot of translation, and it is sometimes you are quite only with 30.
Yeah.
Water with 200.
Yeah, there's water is
with 300.
water. Water is usually kind of the performance test for the whole kind of technical back end, because it kind of times out because there's so many translations. People keep adding to the entry for water that they have to put all sorts of hacks in there to make it actually show up without producing any errors. But yeah, that's really you just go to the word, and maybe I don't know if you have any it's no internet here, but otherwise maybe afterwards you can have a look at some of those pages, and you just open that translation box and you see like a long list, like depending, some entries don't have that many translations, and some have more. And that's also like a really easy way if you want to contribute, is just go to the entry and add translations, because that's really easy. Like, you just go to the translation box and then look at the sense you want to translate, and then put in the word of the language. And you can even put in words which are not on the Wiktionary yet. That's another thing. You can just, it's kind of like, as I said, like a work in progress. So people will create links to words which don't exist. I put that's also something I have in this glossary in the handout. I hope there's enough copies here. So like, you have these kind of red links, and if you see like a red link on Wiktionary, that means that the word there's nothing behind this link. So it's like a 404 or like a page not found. But then somebody might come along and just create that entry, so you just, the idea is just to sometimes, even if you don't really like, you learn, for example, like in this language learning situation, you don't have like an exact idea of all the different meanings of a word, but that's not some problem. Like, if you know one, you can just put in the entry, you know, the part of speech, like if it's a noun, if it's a verb, and so on. Like, this basic information you probably know already. And then you just create this kind of core entry, like, or basic entry, I would say, which has like, it just needs like the language, like what language it is. It needs the part of speech. It needs the head word, which is like the word itself, and it should have like a definition, at least one. And so if you know that, you can already create an entry, and then somebody else might just come along later and then notice your entry. It's like, oh yeah, but it's missing this sense, and then that person might add it, and then somebody else comes along and says, oh yeah, so this is sense is like, but maybe like in Canadian French, there's another meaning here, and so they can just add the Canadian French meaning or additional meaning, and then they just add a little kind of, it's called like a label, and they say, okay, label Canada or Quebec, and then you know, okay, like in different contexts, you can have like words can have different meanings, and that's kind of the beauty of the whole project. Is like because it's so distributed across the world, you have like you have people with all different backgrounds and all different like language experience as well. Like even if you just look at English, like English has just so many different varieties and different countries, and like in any existing dictionary, paper dictionary, that's already like just to document all these different Englishes or the different Spanishes, or that's really tricky. So, but with a project like Wiktionary, that's really easy, because usually you have people who live in a place or like who are exposed to that language or who know it really well, who can add all these kind of subtle, maybe extra meanings to words. And so for example, when I started adding Portuguese entries, I realized that a lot of the existing content was actually mostly focused on, was mostly Brazilian Portuguese, with like lots of words which existed in European Portuguese as well, but had a completely different meaning or had some slang meaning, and so I just started looking at it and just adding the European Portuguese meanings to these words. And that's really interesting, because then like the people who already worked on these entries, like mostly Brazilian, they kind of started this exchange and kind of discussion with existing like contributors, and that's kind of this other like really great aspect of this project, is like you have this constant exchange with people with different linguistic backgrounds, so you're automatically exposed to other varieties of the language you're learning, or other languages in general. So yeah, so that's if you want to contribute. I don't know. I hope I can at least encourage some of you to contribute to this project. I mean, it would be really nice to actually show how an entry is done, because the problem with the project is a little bit, it's really difficult to get started. Like you have to know. I mean, there's a lot of jargon. That's why I have like on this handout, I have like a sort of quick or the most important terms which are used in this community, and sometimes you just have to understand like what people actually want, like because and then there's a lot of like technical challenges, because the platform which is running this whole project has never been designed for creating a dictionary. So. So that, which means like there's all sorts of weird things you have to, like formatting of entries, like everything has to be put in a clear order, and so yeah. But one thing, like if you want to get started, I can recommend is just looking at existing entries, and then look at the source, like the source code of the entry, which is kind of the markup. I have like on the handout, there's also like a short list of the most important kind of media wiki markup tags or templates. So that's kind of special formatting you use to create your entries. And so there's special syntax to create links to other words. There's special syntax to create a new entry. And there's, which are most of these are really already documented, so you can find documentation, but there's no good introduction article which will show you everything. So you have to look at a lot of existing entries, kind of look at how things have been done so far, and then sort of copy and paste. Like that approach works quite well, actually. You just put something new in there and then see if that works, and if something doesn't work out, or if you make a mistake, that's also not a problem, like because that's kind of the principle of the project as well. Like just go ahead, do something, like build, put it in, and the idea is that somebody else will then come and well fix it. I mean, you shouldn't create broken entries, obviously, but there's usually, like, especially if you're a learner and you say like, oh, how can I create a dictionary if it's not even my native language, and like that's really not relevant. Like, even if you don't, like, if you're not completely fluent, you can already create entries, because just, as I said, like the basic things, which is the basic data around entry, and then if there's a mistake, and which can happen, then somebody will usually come along and just fix it for you, and then or tell you even about it and say, oh yeah, you made a mistake, which is also good for the learning process, because that means, like, yeah, you kind of get feedback, and you know, okay, this is not like the right definition for this word, or this is not like the right way of putting, or the right context, yeah, like these kind of things you just learn, and it's a small community as well. Like, so compared to Wikipedia, which has like loads of contributors, Wiktionary is fairly small, and like you get a good night. I think it's like 1,100, 200 active contributors per month or something like that. So it's really like people kind of, I wouldn't say know each other, because it's all like distributed anyway, but it's not this huge massive project where you don't really know, okay, or where to start, and yeah. So I think that was just to kind of the basic. I would really love, like, maybe we can, like, I just saw like 5 minutes. It would be maybe good to have more, like, open it up for more questions, because yeah.
To try to change or to bring what you know. You have a test moment, and you will be when you are writing false things in 2 minutes. It is a way. You can try it. It is not a big problem to try it, and sometimes when you have time, you will change different article, and when you have 6 months more time, it's not a problem. You can go to the dictionary, to Wikipedia, and change the thing. You know, it's possible to I'm in German. You speak German? En French? French is better. Non, le dictionnaire, c'est vraiment très simple de s'inscrire. Et quand vous modifiez quelque chose, il y a déjà les codes qui sont très très simples. Quand on a un peu travaillé sous Word, sous d'autres programmes, on a des informations très très simples, très structurées. Et on va directement dans le code, donc on voit tout de suite comment le reste est formaté. Et si vous faites des erreurs, c'est corrigé par les autres. C'est-à-dire que si vous avez enlevé des grosses bêtises, que Macron est mort, ou que sa femme a pas moins que lui, c'est pas grave. C'est quelqu'un qui s'est corrigé dans les 5 minutes et ça sera arrivé. C'est-à-dire que c'est corrigé très très rapidement dans le monde entier. Et c'est rare que les grosses erreurs restent très longtemps. Des fois, il y a une page de discussion. C'est-à-dire que s'il y a des doutes sur certaines informations, il y aura une page de discussion où on va dire est-ce que tu es sûr de tes sources, ou alors on va poser une question d'où tu tiens l'information. Et c'est vraiment un projet où tout le monde peut participer. C'est-à-dire qu'il n'y a pas de limite. Vous pouvez avoir 6 ans, vous pouvez avoir 80 ans, vous pouvez avoir le bac, être professeur, c'est pas grave, vous pouvez y aller. Vous pouvez faire des modifications, et c'est comme ça. J'ai lu récemment un livre sur l'Oxford Dictionary, et il y a 100 ans, c'était le même système, sauf qu'il n'y avait pas d'informatique. Les gens envoyaient des fiches. Ils envoyaient des fiches, et ces fiches, c'était j'ai vu trouver ce mot-là dans tel livre. C'est la citation, et après c'était repris dans l'Oxford Dictionary. Ils regardaient dans quel livre ça parle. Et le dictionary, c'est le principe, on peut y aller, on peut donner ces informations. Si les informations ne sont pas vérifiables, ça sera supprimé, sinon ça reste. Et des fois, il y a des articles qui restent à un moment qui sont corrigés. Vous avez tout. Et surtout, le dictionnaire français est super. Mais tous, c'est-à-dire que dans l'introduction, il y a toujours marqué le mot, et s'il est en bleu, ça veut dire qu'on peut cliquer dessus et aller directement dans une explication en anglais, en français, dans la même langue que vous cherchez. Et si vous cliquez à droite, entre parenthèses, sur la langue, norvégien, suédois, à côté de la traduction directement, là vous aurez l'explication en norvégien, en suédois. Vous aurez le mot traduit en norvégien et l'explication à partir d'un texte, des explications norvégiennes ou suédoises ou japonaises. Avec l'arabe, j'ai des problèmes. Mais vous pouvez toujours cliquer sur soit l'explication dans votre langue, soit dans la langue d'origine, et puis après vous pouvez changer. Et je vous conseille, allez surfer, changer de langue, c'est vraiment toujours amusant de voir comment un mot est vu sous un autre angle.
Voilà, c'est aussi cet aspect sous un autre angle. Parfois, on parle de le dictionnaire anglophone, le dictionnaire francophone, et c'est vrai qu'il y a parfois les définitions, il y a des grosses différences. Mais à terme, l'idée, c'est de vraiment faire un seul projet qui a toutes les données. Donc ça, c'est d'abord un projet qui s'appelle Wikidata, et pour faire en sorte que centraliser toutes les données pour éviter d'avoir la duplication dans toutes les autres langues. C'est un peu dommage parce que on va perdre un peu l'aspect des autres angles, d'autres points de vue, mais de niveau technique ou seulement pour le travail de refaire toutes les entrées dans toutes les langues. Yeah, but the whole Wikidata transition that's kind of just started, like this project of moving into like having one central kind of storage for all of the words, that's just started, and it will take some time. So right now I would recommend like working with the English Wiktionary because that's the most complete, sort of like with the largest coverage in terms of languages. So you find pretty much everything. There's Esperanto, there's like I think there might be some other like smaller languages, and if you work like, for example, if you're learning French, I always have a look at the corresponding Wiktionary, like the Wiktionnaire, or there's like the German Wiktionary. For the language, like if your target language is one of those, then you usually get better definitions or more like content in there. But for actually putting content in, like if you want to add something, I would recommend doing it in the English one because it just will make it simpler later on to make it kind of like move everything together in one place. But, right, thank you.